Ryan, Geddie, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was great to meet you in DC.
Yeah, it was great to meet you too. Maybe we should explain that to our audience because we saw each other at like some events, the most prominent of which was called LibCon. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it was a conference hosted by the Institute for the Study of Modern Authoritarianism. It was about bringing together people from all over the political spectrum who believe in liberal democracy, I think is the quickest way to sum it up. It was really fun.
Yeah. Um, so with that out of the way, since you're very well known as a commentator on liberalism, is that where you would place yourself on the ideological spectrum? Would you describe yourself as just like a liberal Democrat? End of story.
Yeah, I just call myself a liberal. Sometimes people ask me why I don't call myself, something more complicated. Part of it, I appreciate the simplicity of just one word. I don't like to add lots of different descriptors. I think it boxes me in too much. I just like to call myself a liberal. People in real life understand what liberal means. Online, it gets a little complicated because people like to sort of slice and dice things a little too much for my liking. But in real life, I find that whenever I say that I'm a liberal, people basically understand what that means.
That's interesting. I believe you live in a red state, right?
Yeah, I live in Texas.
What is that like? What is it like living in Texas as a liberal? And how has that affected the way that you talk to people about liberalism?
Well, it's not great, right? So in Texas, Democrats haven't won a statewide office since, before I was born. So we've had a bit of a rough go of it for my lifetime, at least. Right now, Talarico's running, and he's the best shot we've had since 2018 when Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz. So life's rough for liberals in Texas. I guess it probably has affected my perspective on liberalism. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, whenever someone was asking me about the take that I gave about liberalism and populism. And I was thinking, I probably am more comfortable than a lot of people talking about like populist rhetoric because the conservatives have been the establishment in every aspect of, from the state level down in my life for the whole time. So the conservatives do feel like the establishment here in a way that probably doesn't resonate for people who live in states like California or New York or other solid blue states or people even who have never lived outside of a major metro area.
Yeah, so like being the liberal where you grow up doesn't make you feel like an outsider. Is that the case?
Sure it does. Being, but I don't know. It was never, I never put too much stock in it. I've always been pretty forthright with my beliefs. It never really made me too worried to talk about it or anything.
Well, time for you to be forthright about your beliefs on this podcast. So
Okay,
you alluded
good.
to this earlier when you mentioned someone was talking to you about your recent video about liberalism and populism. Do you want to get into that? Get into the nitty gritty?
Sure. Well, I made a video. I'm trying to think of what the YouTube A/B test finally settled on for the title, but it was about liberalism and populism and the relationship between liberalism and populism. And basically the thesis of the video was that populism is kind of the watchword in a lot of liberal spaces. People lay everything that's wrong with modern politics at the feet of populism. And, I understand what they're getting at. There's a lot of problems with modern populism. But what I wanted to do is point out that a lot of liberal reform movements in history were absolutely populist. By any reasonable definition, I think. People didn't use liberal in the United States as a political descriptor until people used it as an adjective. I have a liberal policy on X or Y or Z. But nobody said, I'm a liberal and meant it in the way that we understand it until FDR came around and started using it to describe his agenda. So liberalism in the United States as a systematic ideology really had its birth in a populist moment. So I think that's something that I wanted to highlight in that video.
Yeah. All right, maybe let's get down to brass tacks a little bit because populism is a word that people use and it's a word that I've talked about on my podcast. But sometimes people mean different things when they say it. So, like, how would you personally define populism?
Well, I think it's a style of politics that um, basically aims to represent the interests of average or common people against some entrenched or elite class. And how those two things are defined, the common person and the elite or entrenched or corrupt class, is what distinguishes different kinds of populisms. Populism itself is not an ideology like socialism or conservatism or liberalism or nationalism even. It's a very I've heard some people call it a thin ideology because it's really more of a style of politics that can be applied to a lot of different things.
All right. So maybe would you agree that populism has more appeal with voters who have like less income or less education?
I think it can. Um, I think populism appeals to people who are angry, and you can be angry for a lot of reasons, including you know if you're destitute. But I think populism can appeal to people who are uh, angry generally or discontented generally. Um, I would say that different kinds of populism appeal to people who are angry about different things.
All right.
So,
Different kinds of populism appeal to people who are angry about different things. So
yeah.
what kind of populism appeals to Americans that tend to have less education or less income?
Well, I think it depends. I think it's not so simple. I think it depends on what exactly you're mad about, right? So if you're mad about, um, immigration, for example, a right wing populist might be able to come along and talk about immigration and make you angry that way. If you are incredibly poor and you're destitute, someone who comes along and talks about making your life better, um, can appeal to you with populism in that direction.
All right. So the Americans like that tend to have less education, less income. What is your explanation for why Trump was able to win those voters over in 2024?
Win what voters? People with less education?
Yeah, like let's say like working class Americans or people without a college degree. Um, this is the
Well,
stuff. Go ahead.
well, I think Trump made some policy pivots that appealed to them. I think Trump's pivot against trade probably appealed to a lot of people who felt like they were downwardly mobile. I think Trump also was just kind of appeal. I think there was always a desire for something like Trump in the conservative base in American politics. I think that was something that was always there. It was really, people forget this, but it was really an accident of circumstance that Trump was able to win the 2016 nomination. Trump, until the very end, he wasn't commanding a majority of the Republican Party. He was able to win state after state because the field against him was so divided. And there was no, if you remember, like in 2020, a lot of the more moderate candidates dropped out in the Democratic primary and endorsed Biden because they were worried about Bernie. And leaving aside the comparison between Bernie and Trump, that's not what I'm trying to do here. But they dropped out, and a lot of the moderate voters coalesced around Biden. Um, no such thing happened really in 2016. There was no moment where all the more like establishment type candidates dropped out and got behind Marco Rubio, for example. Um, and so Trump was able to win state after state with his percentage of the base, and that was able to win him the nomination. And then eventually the election. I think we can overread some of these things as well. 2016 was a really close election. Of course, Hillary Clinton famously won the popular vote. It's not like Trump was exceptionally popular even then. Um, I think in some ways, like I said, we can overread these things too much. We had just come off of 8 years of a Democratic administration. A Republican winning after that is not horribly surprising.
Yeah, but it is worth mentioning that like if let's take for example educational polarization because you would agree that there are like at least some groups of people where like populism works better for people who have lower levels of education. It's worth
I
no
think different kinds of populism work. I think it's not so simple as saying like people who have low education are attracted to all kinds of populism. So I think people who are frustrated in their lives can be attracted to populism. People who are, and that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes there's legitimate things to be frustrated about. Like if you are incredibly poor, that's something legitimate to be frustrated about. If you feel like, you know, things are running amok in your city, you know, your house has gotten broken into 3 times over the past month, that's an acceptable thing to feel very frustrated about because it's at some level, it feels like the social contract is being broken between you and the state. You know, whenever things like that happen, whenever there's kind of disorder, in the sense of in the broad sense, whether or not it means your livelihood has been taken away from you somehow, or you don't feel safe in your neighborhood. These are all things that make people feel like the social contract has been broken, essentially. And that kind of stuff feeds into populism. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying, people with lower levels of education um, are more attracted to populism. They might be, but I don't think it's the lower level of education that makes them attracted to populism. I think it's the fact that they feel angry and frustrated.
But those types of people that felt angry and frustrated by, like, say, crime and disorder, would you agree with the argument that, like, those types of people were more attracted to Trump than Kamala Harris in the 2024 election?
Sure, I think so.
Yeah. Um, so I guess, do you think that, what do you think about the idea that Democrats lost the 2024 election because they were overly out of touch with the concerns of the average American?
I mean, on some level, that's just kind of a truism, I think. You win and lose the election based on more or less people agreeing or disagreeing with you. So it's sort of a truism, I guess. If you lose the election, you're almost by definition more out of touch than the other guy.
Yeah. So there's one criticism that I hear, and I'm sure that you hear this because you go to, like, conferences like LibCon and Welcome Fest or whatever. So, like, I'm sure you've heard this 100 times. So I apologize if you're tired of hearing this, but I need to bring this up just to, like, raise the objection. So one criticism I've heard is that part of the reason why Democrats lost the 2024 election is because they spent way too much time complaining about Trump and not enough time talking about affordability, which the average American cares about much more than they care about, like, Trump's character or whatever. What would you say to that argument?
I think I- it's hard because we don't have like a counterfactual, I guess, of a world where we ran the presidential campaign but talked more about affordability and less about Trump. I think Trump's character has absolutely held him down, though. I mean, do you think that? Let me ask you: do you think in a world where Trump had better character, would his approval rating be higher right now or lower?
I think it would be marginally higher.
Yeah, I think it'd be marginally higher too. I mean, these things, it's good to not be monocausal about these things, but I think Trump's bad behavior and general incompetence has hurt him, not helped him.
All right, let's imagine a counterfactual where the 2024 election, where Democrats complained about Trump even more than they did. Do you think that they would have done better or worse?
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the messenger too. If someone is able to craft an effective narrative, it's impossible. Let me answer this more clearly. I think it's a bad idea to just complain about Trump. You shouldn't just complain about Trump, but you have to what you should do is you should connect your complaints about Trump to something real. Jon Ossoff is an example of someone who does this well. He attaches corruption issues to the struggles and experiences of the average American. A lot of Democrats do this, but I think he does it the best that I've seen.
Do you think Jon Ossoff does it well because he is willing to use populist rhetoric more than other Democrats do?
I think that's part of it. Yeah. I think the fact that he's willing to say things like the Epstein class without sounding, mealy mouthed, the fact that he's willing to talk about, the truth of the matter, which is that there are a lot of very rich people making a lot of money off of this administration at the expense of average people. I think people know that. People can see that, and it resonates with people whenever you have a candidate who's willing to just come out and say it.
So maybe the reason why populism works so well is that it gives people, like, a foe that they can villainize and defeat.
I mean, sometimes there just is a foe, you know? I mean, this is the thing. I think there's a lot of people in liberal politics who are uncomfortable with that, but the right certainly is not. I mean, one of the things that to bring it back to Jon Ossoff, he cited this speech from Eric Schmidt, a senator from Missouri, in one of Ossoff cited this speech by Schmidt in one of his speeches that he gave at a campaign rally. This is a speech in which Eric Schmidt is talking about how the only real Americans are the white people who settled the frontier. I mean, what am I supposed to say to that? That's wrong. I mean, that's a heinous political view to have. I'm not going to pretend like these people are simply just wrong on tax policy or whatever. I mean, they seek to fundamentally redefine out of existence millions of Americans who are full citizens right now. I mean, I think that's just ridiculous. And to say that those people are just, you know, my loyal opposition colleague, I don't know. I'm just not going to do it. Those people have a fundamentally different vision of America than me. And whenever J.D. Vance and people like him, when people like Eric Schmidt call themselves post-liberal, you know, this is the word that they use a lot. They talk about post-liberalism. It's important to know that they don't mean like slightly less woke, right? They mean post-liberal democracy. They think that the ideals of the country, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all that stuff, they think that that is fundamentally wrong. They want a country where people are less equal. They think that the idea of universal citizenship, where people are equal before the law, was wrong-headed. So yeah, I mean, I think these people are my political enemy, and I would like to see them defeated. And they can all go have nice jobs at the Claremont Institute, and we can never hear from them again, as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think liberals need to be meaner to conservatives in order to win future elections?
I don't think it's about necessarily. I mean, obviously, it's all about, at some level, winning elections, but I think you could just be honest for the sake of being honest. I mean, I don't think it's mean to say these people. I don't think it's mean to say that J.D. Vance is the closest thing we've ever had to a fascist that close to political power in the United States. I mean, like an actual ideological, like, fascist. Whenever you listen to the things that he says, that's the kind of politician that he is. He believes in a sort of weird fusion of like futurism and traditionalism. He has this whole idea about the purity of the Volk in America. I mean, he's that to a T. And I don't think that that's being mean to him. I think that's being honest about what he is. And I think it's honest to say that this administration is being grifted by a lot of the tech billionaire folks and a lot of other business elites, and it's being taken advantage of to make a lot of people rich, but also push a conservative agenda. These two things are happening at the same time.
So we would agree that Trump campaigned in 2016 and 2020 as a populist, right?
Yeah, sure, but populist is not like the reason. Populism was not what he was. I mean, he campaigned as a conservative Republican. He used populist campaign rhetoric, and he used a populist strategy to promote his agenda. But to say Trump campaigned as a populist doesn't tell you actually anything about the things that he supported. I mean, you can say populist, and you can be referring to someone like Bernie Sanders, or you can be referring to the late 1800s, populist movement, or you can be referring to someone, I would contend, like Jon Ossoff, who also refers to an elite class taking advantage of the average American. So I just don't think that saying Trump was a populist says much about the reasons why we dislike him. The reasons why I dislike Trump are that he's against liberal democracy, not because he uses populist rhetoric.
Yeah, so I would agree that populism, like the fact that Trump is a populist, doesn't really say that much about why you oppose him. And I would go even farther and say that it doesn't say that much about why I oppose him either. But I do think that it says a lot about why certain voters were willing to vote for him because he
Absolutely.
constantly championed anti-elite rhetoric.
For sure.
Like these elites are the enemies that are like extremely corrupt and like are cheating you and scamming you. And
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever people are frustrated, Thomas Paine has a good quote in The Rights of Man, where he says that the only thing that a riot signifies is that people are angry. Um, and I think that it's something like that. I totally butchered it. You can look up the quote for yourself. But I mean, I think that's sort of the same. I think that's sort of a similar thing with populism. I mean, it signifies that people are angry, and and that's about it.
it signifies that people are angry, and that's about it. So
That is
maybe
about, yeah.
maybe they would be angry like regardless of whether the populism was oriented towards like actual correct policies. Like Trump used his populism to talk about how he was going to go after all the people who like prosecuted him because there was this vast web and this vast government conspiracy that was just trying to cheat him and trying to cheat working class Americans. Like
Yeah.
that was populism in the same way that Jon Ossoff is championing populism. Maybe there isn't actually a clear correlation between like how popular populism is and how directionally correct those actual policies are on the merits.
I think that you can definitely use populism to push correct policy. I mean, I don't know how you feel about FDR, but I feel like on balance, the New Deal was a good thing for America, especially in the midst of the Great Depression. Um, Certainly, liberalism has its foundation in literally revolutionary movements. I mean, not to bring up Thomas Paine again, but his most famous pamphlet was literally called Common Sense. I mean, it doesn't get much more populist than naming your pamphlet Common Sense. That's the kind of rhetoric where if you were to use it today, people would be very frustrated at you for using it, for sounding too populist, I think.
Do you think Democrats should run on things like rent control or rent freezes in order to increase their populist appeal with the median American?
I I don't know. I would have to see if those policies did actually appeal to the median American. I think rent control on the merits is not a very good policy, not for lowering the price of housing anyway. I mean, it's good for, certain people, but for a long term project of making housing less expensive, I think a more a more effective thing to do would just be to build a ton of new housing, basically by any means necessary. And you could imagine a populist pitch for that as well.
I can sort of imagine a populist pitch for that now, but there's got to be a reason why I couldn't imagine a populist pitch for that 5 years ago when people thought that like trying to build new homes or YIMBYism, people thought that that was dead in the water
Yeah,
because of how unpopulist that was. There's
I
got to
think,
be a reason.
well, could you reframe? So 5 years ago, you think that the idea of building more was dead in the water for what reason?
Like politically, like it was not
Yeah.
politically popular enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still not incredibly politically popular to build new housing. I mean, excuse me, out, in a lot of neighborhoods, people don't want new things built near them. I mean, that's sort of the genesis of the term NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. It's still not incredibly popular in a lot of places to build new housing. I think a lot of people are recognizing it as necessary now in a way that they weren't before. I think part of that has to do with the tireless activism from a lot of people who recognize that we needed to build more housing. I think some of it is the fact that the problem has gotten worse over time. I mean, as the population grows and more houses aren't built for people to live in, it's going to get worse, right? But I think I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think those are probably the main drivers. The fact that the problem's gotten worse, the previous solutions were also seen to just be not working. You have you read the abundance book? Are
I
you an
have,
abundance
yes.
pilled person?
I am an
So,
abundance pilled
one
person.
of one of the critiques that they offer in that book, and I think it's right, is that the sort of progressive movement for a long time was very interested in kind of like a small is beautiful mindset, and they didn't want like massive building projects that would despoil the environment and stuff like that. And there's something to that. I mean, we obviously don't want to pollute all the rivers and streams and, knock all the birds out of the sky make everyone live like they're in those pictures of LA from the 70s where like you can't even see the ocean because there's so much smog. Um, but we do have to build new things. And so I think a lot of people over the last 5 to 10 years are discovering that the previous solutions of like just merely regulating the price of housing is not doing enough to lower the price of housing. And so they're reaching for other solutions.
I'm very glad that you brought up the Abundance book because I'm a huge fan of it, and I'm a huge fan of the authors Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, and I'm sure that you're very, very invested in their work. So maybe let's talk about the Abundance agenda a little bit more, specifically what it talks to when it comes to housing, where it talks about like building new homes, getting rid of like unnecessarily cumbersome zoning regulations to
Sure.
give people permission to build more homes and thus increase supply and thus decrease the price of homes and the cost of rent and so on and so forth. One thing that I found so interesting about the book is just like how unpopulist it is and how technocratic it is. It's very, very like talking about like extremely granular economic issues and extremely granular policy wonk issues, not trying to make it an elite, like an anti-elite populist thing about like these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. It's more like these are policies that were well intentioned many decades ago, but it's best to get rid of them now because like these numbers suggest that it would be good for the economy. Do you
Yeah.
think that part of the reason why the abundance agenda has been like so helpful for the country is because it is not trying to co-opt populist messaging?
I mean, I think it's too early to say whether it's been helpful yet. I mean, I think that a lot of the policies would be good. I think it's yet to be seen whether or not abundance will like be the movement that galvanizes the nation or whatever. I think a lot time will tell on that. It's a little too early to, start throwing the parades for abundance. But I will say that a lot of the policies in that book, I think would be good policies. One of the things, though, that both Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have talked about, they did an interview, well, I guess with each other, and then someone else who I can't remember on the 1 year anniversary of Abundance coming out. They went on Ezra Klein's show,
Yeah,
and
I'll
they
leave a link in the show notes in case anyone wants to see.
and they talked about the necessity of populism for selling abundance policies. They talked about the need, but for people to make the pitch about how this is going to help the average person in terms that aren't just about increasing GDP by 2% over some period of time. I mean, they talked about the necessity for that. They even opened the book with this whole vignette about like the abundist future, right? With like, flying cars and space elevators and all that. So I think they're very cognizant of the need for storytelling and to some extent populism, even if Derek Thompson specifically is a little bit afraid of that word in selling their policy agenda.
And I do definitely agree that like liberalism and Democrats need to provide like a more clear story for their constituents as a way to like galvanize them, inspire them, and show them like a clear contrast between what they have to offer and what Republicans have to offer.
Yeah.
Um, so like I want to stick on the populism angle maybe just for a little bit longer because I'm thinking about how populism obviously it deals with what is popular. Sometimes like being anti-elite is very popular, and
Hmm.
sometimes like there are certain policies that are more populist. Maybe an example would be like people, especially Americans, tend to hate taxes and they tend to hate
Yeah.
increases in taxes. So do you think that like Democrats can like support tax cuts as a way to be more populist with the average American?
I think that being populist is about more than just like looking at the polls and doing what is popular. I think it's about having a more wholesale vision of like a policy agenda that is about helping average people eh, against some elite class or some entrenched class. So it's not just about looking at the polls and doing what is popular. There's another name for that. This is a I think maybe Matthew Iglesias invented this word. He calls it popularism, which is a thing that he and some others promote as a way for Democrats to to do better in elections, which is to, basically look at the polls. This is the very vulgar version of it. To look at the polls and say, this is what's popular. These are the issues we're on the wrong side of, and we need to win more elections. So let's change our positions on the things that we're unpopular on, and win that way. They often use this to encourage Democrats to moderate on social issues. And I don't want to impugn anyone in particular, but I do notice a lot of these people are very uncomfortable when it comes to the reality of what that kind of political strategy leads you to, which is, as you say, demagoguery on tax cuts. I mean, we saw this with Abdul El-Sayed. He was talking about, eliminating property taxes for seniors. That is a policy that appeals traditionally to moderate and conservative voters. But I don't know if you were following that whole discourse, but in the aftermath of that, there was a whole freak out on Twitter, at least from the kind of policy wonk space, from the same people who would be encouraging candidates to take, more popular stances on usually social issues is what they're talking about. So anyway, I sort of went on a tangent there, but I did just want to point out that people can sometimes be a little selective with what they're concerned about when it comes to Democrats taking unpopular or popular policy stances, because cutting taxes, eliminating taxes for the elderly, is a popular policy, at least with the elderly.
Yeah, so maybe if there was a Democrat who was a huge populist, and being a huge populist, he campaigned on tax cuts, you would not support that version of populism, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, it depends on what the other options are, right? In an election these days, I mean, I'm going to be supporting the Democrat. I mean, let's just be real. I mean, the other option is not acceptable to me really under any circumstances right now. I mean, there's no world in which I would ever vote for J.D. Vance for president. You know what I mean? So any Democrat that they put up, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be an unconvinced voter here. But what I will say is that it's important to remember that populist, Donald Trump, he changed the voters' minds on some things within his own party. For example, before Trump came around, the Republican opinion on trade was that free trade was the optimal thing to do. That was the thing that Republicans supported generally before Trump came along. These days, Democrats have gotten so negatively polarized by Trump that you have Democrats talking like, I don't know, like Adam Smith about free trade. They're talking like, just eliminate all tariffs, which, fine by me. I have never liked trade barriers all that much ever. And Republicans are the protectionist party. So I think it takes a candidate who's a very strong narrative builder, who's a very strong storyteller, who can bring the party around to positions that used to be unpopular, but can be popular. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of answering your question about how I would feel about a Democrat campaigning on tax cuts, which is, I think it's not an optimal policy. I would not want that as like a person who's interested in effective policy. But I also don't know if it's necessary. I think it's necessary, though, to not just make the argument against tax cuts as like a technocratic matter. You have to explain to people in a way that they can understand why taxes are necessary. What are we using taxes for?
I just wanted to apologize again for smiling and laughing. Once again, I don't have anything against you. It's just a reflex.
No, you're good.
All right, cool. So maybe when it comes to making the case to people and why it's so important to make the case to people, and sometimes that might come in the form of telling people a story about what they should support and why they should support certain political candidates. Could you talk again about why you think that liberalism doesn't really have a clear vision or a clear story that it wants to tell people these days?
Well, what do you think the story that liberalism is telling these days is?
I think I know the story that it used to tell, but I don't know the story that it's telling these days. Maybe
I mean, this is sort of the whole thesis. This is sort of my whole thesis, right? Is that liberalism used to have more of a clear story, and today it doesn't, for a variety of reasons. What do you think the story that liberalism used to tell is? I'm curious.
I think 5 to 10 years ago, the story that it told was the Great Awakening. demographics is destiny, like the desire to police people's microaggressions, where
Okay.
like that brought out like a very large section of like a large section of the base that was still a minority of the country was incredibly invested in like woke issues of like trying to deal with microaggressions and like trying to deal with trying to deal with the great awakening and in the like this is like the way that they would justify this from an electoral perspective is back then they thought that they could increase voter turnout from minorities and that would help them to permanently win against Republicans. And then like the cultural collapse was like the critique against wokeness. The electoral collapse was 2020 and 2024 sort of defeating the demographics is destiny story. So like once that's gone, they don't really have anything to say other than like boring pluralism. Like, do you prefer the kind of bland and boring like pluralism of today, or like the microaggression police of like 5 or 6 years ago?
Well, I think maybe we have different starting points when it comes to thinking about when liberalism lost its story. So I would actually go back further. I think that liberalism sort of ended up losing a kind of sense of itself. Well, there's a lot. There's a couple places to put it. I think one obvious place to put it would be after the Cold War ended. Um, it looked from this point on that there would be no serious challenges to the broad liberal, the liberal democratic framework for government. And so all politics had to be was a series of kind of technocratic disagreements
Mostly among
between
elites.
between like think tank types is exactly right. So I think that is sort of an affliction that liberalism has had since that era. There was a very popular theory that liberalism could be something other than like an ideology, that liberalism didn't actually have to be an ideology. Liberalism could be like these set of precepts about procedure that we could all just hold to and believe in, and this would be like the glue that held us together in the fight between like progressives and conservatives. This was, a very popular a very popular way to view what liberalism was at the time. And I think, maybe it was possible then, maybe it was right then, but it's certainly mistaken now. I mean, like I was talking about earlier, we have the vice president calls himself a post-liberal. And, he doesn't mean just less woke. He means anti-liberal democracy. That's what he means. That's what the post-liberals mean whenever they talk about being post-liberal. And so I think it's necessary for liberals to go back to a time where there was some real, almost deontological faith in the ideals of liberalism, not just from a kind of, increases GDP perspective, but from the perspective of people who believe in certain things called, inalienable rights, from the perspective of an ideology that believes at some fundamental level in the ability of people to govern themselves, an ideology that believes in at some fundamental level in like human equality. These are the kind of principles that I think used to motivate liberalism, and I think whenever you talk to a lot of people who call themselves liberals these days, you detect no trace of any of these kinds of things, which is sad to me.
So what do you think they mean when they say pluralism, and how does that differ from like the way that you would perceive it?
Well, I mean, pluralism. I mean, I'm definitely for pluralism as well. I mean, that's definitely one of those principles, right? I think a lot of liberals, whenever they talk about liberalism today, they essentially mean a kind of like just vaguely technocratic governance without ideology. You'll hear liberals talk about. There was an interesting bit of that conversation between Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson and one other person who I still can't remember on the 1-year anniversary of Abundance, where they watched like a clip at the end of Bernie Sanders talking about abundance. And he was like, well, I like abundance. This is what Bernie Sanders is saying. Bernie said something like, I like abundance, but it's good government. It's not ideology. And then they go on to have like a couple-minute conversation about this. And I don't think they understood what he meant at all. They didn't understand like, they just seemed not to grasp the idea that like you you really ought to have some underlying principles that motivate your policy decision making. I think I'm being a little unfair. I think Ezra did actually sort of grasp this, but I feel like Derek Thompson totally did not.
You need
I'm
to
sorry
have
to
some
say.
kind of like underlying ideology behind your policies. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you can't avoid that even in liberalism. I mean, let's think about sometimes you can only do one thing. You have to make a decision on a moral issue sometimes. One example, the school system. If we're going to have a public school system, we have to decide at some point what's going to be taught. Are we going to teach, I remember whenever I was younger, it was a very live debate. This is something that the new atheists spent a lot of time talking about. It was a very live debate on whether or not we were going to teach creationism in schools, whether or not we were going to teach kids in school that God created Earth, and and that this was a reasonable theory to teach in science class alongside um, alongside evolution and alongside the Big Bang, right? Uh, at some point, you have to decide: is that okay to teach in science class, or is it not? Um, and we can't just ignore the question.
What questions do you think Democrats are ignoring right now at their own peril?
Well, I think a lot of people, this is one of the reasons why I'm so positive about Ossoff lately, is I feel like he recognizes the fundamental challenge to liberal democracy coming from the right now in a way that a lot of Democrats do not. Um, the fact that he knew about that speech that Eric Schmidt gave and cited it in a campaign speech that he was giving, I mean, I think shows that he has some understanding of what's happening right now in a way that I feel like a lot of uh, Democrats don't. They, like we were talking about earlier, they focus a lot of their energy and attention on just Trump. Just Trump. He's the genesis of everything that's wrong with modern politics, and certainly Trump deserves a lot of the blame for some things that are wrong with American politics. But there's also more to it than that. So I would say that a lot of Democrats still have not, I don't know, pardon the phrase, but woken up to the idea that a lot of the people on the right now are fundamentally against the idea of liberal democracy in the way that we understand it right now. They don't like it. I mean, they certainly would like to tear down fundamental pillars of it. I mean, getting rid of birthright citizenship. That's something that is going to be now a fundamental aim of the conservative legal movement. It's going to be probably like the next crusade against Roe v. Wade. I mean, that's probably what a lot of the conservative legal movement is going to spend the next 50 years trying to undo. They're going to try and come up with legal theories that justify ending birthright citizenship, that justify ignoring the plain text of the Constitution to get rid of it. So I don't know. I feel like, I guess to sum up the answer, I feel like a lot of Democrats still just don't understand that a lot of the right, particularly the kind of intellectual elite right, has decided that they had to choose at some point between conservatism and democracy, and they chose conservatism.
So I'm very sympathetic to basically everything that you said, especially how a lot of these strands of conservatism or like the Republican Party do represent an existential threat to American ideals. But I would like to play devil's advocate one more time. I think that one lesson that people took away from 2020, 2022, and then especially 2024 is that like democracy and a lot of these existential issues are not something that Democrats can win on because they are too abstract to the average American compared to the price of
Yeah,
eggs.
maybe not. Look, I'm not here to tell people, exactly how to run their campaign. It could be that it is just absolutely not optimal. A good example of this is talking about eliminating the filibuster. I would not talk about eliminating the filibuster in a campaign speech. Not really. I mean, maybe you mention it, but you don't make it a fundamental plank of like what you talk about. I don't think people care or understand what that is. What you do is you talk about what you want to do after you eliminate the filibuster, right? You talk about the things that you're going to deliver after you eliminate the filibuster. And so I think in a similar way, it's important to connect the destruction of American liberal democratic institutions to real life. Because you're right. A lot of people want to know why this matters to them. So you have to explain, and not to beat a dead horse again, but that's why at the beginning I mentioned Ossoff talking about doing a pretty good job at connecting the corruption of the Trump administration to the worsening of everyone's quality of life in America.
So obviously, I think we would at least agree that Trump's populist appeal did play a role in his victory in 2024. Maybe
Yeah,
because back then the average voter was more likely to see Democrats as elitist or out of touch, so on and so forth. So
yeah.
let's say that your strategy works and it helps drive Republicans and causes Republicans to lose in 2026, 2028, and so on and so forth. How do we make sure that Democrats don't become don't end up giving rightly or wrongly give off the impression of being the boot or being the system or being the oppressor, regardless of what they do, just because they're in power again?
Well, nobody wins forever. I mean, this is something that we can't avoid. Nobody wins forever. And that really shouldn't be the goal, because if the goal is forever victory, you're just going to be disappointed. What the goal should be is making the kind of politics that is anti-liberal democracy untenable, right? We have to make that electoral suicide, basically, to talk about. That is the goal, from my perspective, anyway. So if the question is how to make Democrats win forever, nobody can give you that answer. I certainly can't give you that answer. Even after the New Deal, that coalition couldn't hold together forever, and it was probably, I mean, certainly within modern American history, the closest thing that we've had to that sort of system where one party is just winning, 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 winning. But even that couldn't hold together forever. I just don't think it's possible, and it's on some level probably not even desirable to have one party just winning, winning, winning forever and ever.
Do you think it's possible for Democrats to last as long in the Oval Office as FDR did?
As FDR, well, I mean, it's not possible anymore, right? Because we have the term limit.
But no,
And
the party, not an individual.
oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, anything's possible, right? Is it likely? I mean, probably not. I think the situation's different now. If we could get two terms, in a row, I'd be happy. If we could get two terms in a row and put Trumpism and the whole ideological structure of post-liberalism and national conservatism that's formed to justify his authoritarian ambitions in the dustbin of history, I would be satisfied.
All right. Maybe this will be one of my last questions. So there are some, obviously, when it comes to policies, there are some policies that are popular, some policies that are unpopular. There are some policies that are good and some policies that are bad. But let's say that there are some policies that are both good and unpopular, like tax increases or some specific aspects of the abundance movement. How do you think populist Democrats should talk about policies like tax increases?
Well, I think depending on, I think a lot of populists are very good at trying to sell tax increases in a way that's popular. Talking about making people pay their fair share or whatever. But to answer the question more substantively, which is, it's true that if progressives want to have a expanded welfare state, it's going to include expanded taxes on more than just the very rich. That's something that has to be confronted with policy at some point. It's the inevitable math of the federal budget, and it's something that other countries have run into as well. And I think you just have to try and do it. I mean, other countries have implemented universal health care. We can talk about paying more in taxes to fund a universal healthcare system if we want. I think Bernie Sanders famously did that exact same thing. He talked about how, of course, it would require a raise in taxes to fund Medicare for all. And, this isn't me endorsing one particular healthcare plan or whatever, but I'm, trying to answer how I think a populist would talk about it. in a way that's more, I guess, intellectually honest. But Bernie Sanders talked about, I remember on the debate stage, he said, of course, it's going to require raising taxes, but it's going to make you better off. It's going to make you better off because you won't have to live in a world where if you get fired from your job, you lose your health care. You're no longer beholden to your boss in that way. So you're getting dominated by your employer less than you were before. It's better for you because the amount you're paying in taxes is going to be less than you're paying for your insurance. So it's better for you on those two counts. And it's better morally because now we live in a country where people aren't going bankrupt for healthcare expenses. So, I think you can definitely talk about these things in a more intellectually honest way than just saying, oh, the rich will pay for it all. But it requires some ambition and some commitment to an ideological project. And I think those are two things that, whether you agree with them or not, Bernie Sanders definitely has.
Final question. Let's say that there are people that have been listening to this and they've been fascinated by all the stuff that you've been saying, and they kind of want to check out your YouTube channel right now. How would you pitch them into becoming potential subscribers of your YouTube channel?
Well, first I'll say thank you for listening to the whole conversation. I'm Ryan Geddie. I talk about liberalism. I also talk about politics generally and political philosophy and history. I try and do things in a somewhat entertaining way. I try and mix it up with some more fun videos and some more history-oriented videos and some more political philosophy-oriented videos. So there's something for everybody there. You should go check it out. The liberal populism video is pinned to my homepage right now, so you can get the full unadulterated liberal populism take right there if you go to my channel page.
Ryan Geddie, thank you so much for taking the time to come onto this podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was great to meet you again.